Hello guys, welcome to today's tutorial, and in today's video I'll be showing us how we can integrate Chart.js using Angular as well as data coming from a REST API. The API we're going to be working with is from the Coinranking API, and it's something I've worked with a couple of times on my tutorials, and we continue with that today. So as you can see on the page, it's a sample of what we are going to build. What we have here is data from cryptocurrencies. If I hover over one of the charts, and then I get a label that shows the details. So as you can see, this one is Bitcoin and the price around 47,000. If I over another one, let's say that of XRP, you can see it shows XRP as well as the price. So without wasting much time, let's get straight into it. So first thing I'm gonna do is to open up my terminal, and I already have a directory called map. So I'm gonna generate a new Angular project inside this directory. So the command I'm gonna use to do that is to run ng new, and I'm going to call this project ng chart. So I press enter. Some question prompt is gonna come up before the project is being generated. First thing it asks is if I would like routing for this project. Of course, we don't need routing, so I'm going to say no. And then it asks if we want to use CSS, XCSS, SASS, which is SAS, or less. But we'll just go with CSS. In fact, we will not even be using CSS for this project. Now our project has been successfully generated. I can move into that directory, which we call ng chart, and open up the project on Visual Studio Code by running code dot. So inside Visual Studio Code, we have a bunch of boilerplate templates we can work with. If I open up the SRC directory, I have this app directory that has a couple of components. We have an app component.css, app component.html, an app module, and an app component file. This is all what we'll be working with. I won't need to create a new component. Rather, what I will need to create is a new service. The service is used to consume the REST API we're going to be working with today. So to do that, I'm going to run another Angular command called ng generate service, and we can call this auth. So it's going to generate a new service called auth service. As you can see, the service has been generated here. So the next thing we need to do is to go configure the service in our Visual Studio Code. So let me minimize this. Head over to the project, head over to auth-service.ts. Then we can see we have a boilerplate code. For this to work, we need to import a couple of packages. So I can just do that by running import HTTP client, because without importing this, we can't consume the service. We need to work with the API. So I import the HTTP client as well as the HTTP headers. This is coming from at Angular /common/http. Next up is to inject this service in our app module. So I copy this auth service, head over to the app module component. This is where we set up the providers and as well as the imports needed for the application to know we are trying to consume a REST API. So what I can do here is to paste the auth service inside the providers and then import it into the application. Next up is to also import the HTTP client module, because we also need this for the app to recognize we are consuming, we'll be working with a service. So what I'm going to do is to type in HTTP client module. I think we have a little error in the auth service. I head over to the auth service. Oh, made a mistake by not adding the P. So with that done, we can now set up the configuration for our service. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to set up the base URL. So like I said at the beginning of the video, we're making use of Coinranking. So I head over to the Coinranking API documentation, which is on coinranking.com. I scroll to the bottom of the page. There you can see API documentation. And I head over to my dashboard because I have an account with them. This is where I can get the API key I'll need for this project, as well as the API URL we'll be using for this project. So let me open the documentation. So what I'm gonna get is this particular base URL. As you can see at the beginning of the documentation, we have this highlighted string here, URL. So I'm gonna copy this, and then we can create a new variable in our project. So I can just call this private base URL is equal to, so it's gonna be inside of a string rather. So there we have our first variable. Another variable we're gonna need is the proxy URL. But before, okay, let me quickly set that up too. So there is something called let me just create the variable now. So I can just say private proxy URL. So I'll explain the reason why we are using a proxy URL when I complete typing in the URL. So we have https colon double forward slash. So it's gonna be course dash anywhere dot heroku app.com then forward slash. So this is like a form of proxy URL that helps us to bypass any form of course error, because we are trying to consume the API using our front end. We are not setting up any form of proxy server in the backend, probably using Node.js or any form of backend programming language, which allows us to avoid the course error. But because we are setting it up in the front end, we need to bypass the course error, and this URL here is going to help us to do that. So that's why we are setting up a proxy URL. So that's that about that. So the next thing we need to do is just to grab the API key. So I'm gonna head over to my Coinranking dashboard and copy this particular API key. So if you don't have an account with them, you can create an account and then you have access to an API key. So where I'm gonna put the API keys above here, so it's gonna be in form of a variable. So I can just say const API key is equal to, so I put this in a string. So that's our API key we're gonna be using in this project. So one more thing I need to do now is to set up an HTTP options. This is like a form of header. So to do that, I'm gonna create another variable. So I'll say const HTTP options is equals to, it's gonna be in form of an object. So I can just say headers. So new HTTP headers. The HTTP headers is what we imported at the top of our page, if you can see that, alongside the HTTP client. So it's also going to be in an object. So we're going to have something called content type, content dash type, which is going to be application slash JSON. So application forward slash JSON. Another thing we're gonna need is the custom API key, like the form of custom header. So you can just have also in a string. We can call this my custom slash header. So this is gonna come along with the request once we consume the API. So it's gonna be in a backtick. So what we have to do is to reference the API key. So it's gonna be in a backtick. So I'm gonna call the API key variable inside of this particular this header rather. So the last thing I'm gonna do is to now create an access control allow origin. So to do that, it's gonna be inside of a quote too. So we're gonna have access control dash allow dash origin. So this is gonna be in an asterisk. So the asterisk signifies like a form of wildcard, that is, it should allow access from anywhere this REST API is being consumed. Like it's also a form of enhancing our app from getting a form of course error. But this proxy URL already takes care of that. But when we are trying to create an header, this is like a form of convention we try to do when we are trying to avoid the course error also. So that's why I'm also doing that there. So they do over in this project is to create a function that a service rather that consumer API. Before I do that, and then I need to pass in some form of dependency injection. So in Angular, we have something called dependency injection. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to have a private HTTP. Then it's going to make reference to the HTTP client we imported above. So I have HTTP client. So below this constructor, I can just create my service now. So we have crypto data because we are getting data of cryptocurrency. So why not name this function crypto data? So inside this function, I can create a URL. So I can say const URL, and then using make use of the backtick, we can easily access our variables we created above. So the first one I'm gonna do is to call is the proxy URL. So I can just say this dot proxy URL, then also call the base URL. So this dot base URL. So we're good to go with the URL of the application. So we need to return some things. So I'm gonna return this dot http, which has access to the http client. So dot get, because we're trying to get data, we're trying to make use of a get request. So I can just so dot get, then passing first thing I'm gonna pass in is the URL which we created above, which we can see here. So the second thing I'm going to pass in there is the HTTP options, which has the header. So this will come along with our request when we try to consume the data in our application. So I'm going to return a promise. So I'm going to type into promise, and then passing dot. Then there are many ways you can do this. So this is one of the ways. So I'm going to create an arrow function that takes in a variable of data, and then open a bracket, then return the data. So that's all. This is all we need. This is our service that calls our API. So I believe this should work when we try to consume this particular API in our application. So the place we're gonna do that is the app component.ts file, which was generated for us when we're generating this application. So I head over to the app component.ts file. The first thing I'm gonna do is to import the auth service. So let me see if I can quickly do that. So I copy this. I want to make use of the constructor to do this. So I'm going to create the constructor. So constructor, this is like a form of dependency injection. So I call a create a service called private, and then assign it to the auth service file we created earlier in the project. So we need to import this into this particular file. So we can just quickly do that by saying import auth service from, because it's in the same level. So I can just say dot forward slash auth dot service. So I think that's all. I'm gonna clear this title in the chat, and also I'm gonna clear by default, because this is a new project, we're gonna have some bunch of the default templates. So I'm gonna clear everything. In fact, with that, we head back to our app components.html. So this is where we need to this is where we will have to consume our APIs. The next thing we need to do is to create 4 variables we need for this project to work. So I can just create the first one. So I will type in the results, and this is gonna be any coin price, coin name. So not taking a type of any, because we're making use of, by default, Angular makes use of TypeScript. So you need to always specify the type. Um, it's just gonna be any, and it's coming in form of an array. So these are the four variables we are going to need reference to. Before I proceed, like we know we are gonna be making use of Chart.js, we need to import Chart.js. So to do that, I can just quickly head over to the Chart.js documentation, and if you scroll down, and if you go to chartjs.com, this is what you have. So for you to install the application, you need to run npm install chart.js. So that's exactly what we're gonna do now. So I'm gonna copy this line of code and then paste it into our application, and then let that get installed. That's all we're gonna need. So as that is installing, what I can do next is to import that chart.js itself. So I can just say import chart from chart.js. So I guess that's all. Now we need to make use of we are getting the error because it has not fully been installed. I guess that should likely be it, but we don't need to bother with that now. So what I'm gonna do next is to make use of the lifecycle hook called ng on init. This is where we're gonna be calling our service. So the ng on init lifecycle hook works by loading any form of variable or data within it as the page loads. Like the first time of action, when the page loads, this is what this particular lifecycle hook does. There are so many lifecycle hooks in Angular. You can check the Angular documentation for more information on that. So to work with this, what we need to do is to make reference to our service we created in the service file or service file. So I can just say this dot, because we already did the dependency injection here with this private service we have here. So I can just say this dot service dot, the function we have in that service file is something called crypto data, if I'm right. So crypto data, we are supposed to have IntelliSense for that, but I don't know why my Visual Studio Code seems slow today. So it's gonna return a promise, so I can just say dot then, and then we have an arrow function, so I can just say res, open a bracket, then the result variable we have above, I can just pass in the result into that. So I can just say this does results is equals to the response we get from the data. So what I can now, let's console log this and see if we have the data on the console in our project. So console.log this does results. So I'm going to save everything we've done so far, and then I'm going to save the application. Oh boy, what's all this? Yes, Chart.js has been fully installed, so we can just run ng serve. As you can see, the project compiles successfully, exactly what we wanted. So what we can do is head over to the browser, and in the browser we can open the console. Remember, in our code we are sort of logging the results to the console, so with the this dot result variable. So I head over to the console, and oh dear lord, we have a bunch of errors here. So let me click on this link over here and see what we have. It says missing required request header, must specify one. So let me go back to my code, my auth service, because this is likely coming from the auth service. And I noticed two things. The first thing I noticed is base URL does not show what we are trying to consume. That is, we are trying to show a list of coins. So if I head back to the Coinranking documentation, you just have a base URL here, but what we are trying to do is to get a list of coins. So there should be something at the end of the version 2, like it's something like a / coins. We are missing this in the URL, exactly like something like this. So it's supposed to be v2 / coins. So I head over to the project and I correct that by putting a forward slash coins. Let me confirm that again. Yes, forward slash coins. So we are good to go with that. And also in this proxy URL, I noticed a white space here. This is something that could also be causing our error. So let me fix these two things and then save, and we head back to the console to see if the error is duly corrected. And boom, there we go. We have access to the data. So we have a list of coins, an array of coins, and another object called stats. So the one we're going to be working on is called coins. And inside of these coins, let me bold in this a little bit. Inside of these coins, we have a lot of data in each of the objects. So we only need two data inside this object. The first one is a name and the second one is a price. These are the two things I need to display on the chart. So with these two things, we will be done with this particular tutorial. So let me just let me head back to the project, and what we need to do now is head back to our app component.ts file, and then I need to access those two things, that is the coin price and the coin name. That's why I created these two variables earlier. These are what I'll use to access them. So what I'm going to do next is to clear this console.log and then call this dot coin price, and then say is equals to this dot results dot data, because the response returned in our console, if you can see here, it's called data. So this does results, not results dot data dot coins, because we are trying to access the coins. So I'm going to map through this with the map operator in JavaScript. So, and it's going to take in an arrow function called coins. I can pass in this as a type of any, and then in the arrow function I can just return coin dot price. So that's all. So to get the name, I'm just gonna copy this down because it's also the same process. So I'm gonna say this dot coin name. So it's also gonna say this dot result dot data dot coins, map through it, and then we can just return coin dot name. Coin, not coins, coin dot name. So we could also console log these two variables just to be sure we are getting the right response to append to our chart. So I can just say console.log. Can't spell console properly. Console.log this dot coin price, and then can put a comma and say this dot coin name. Save that, head back to the console. The page refreshes on its own, as to most Angular projects you do, except you change the settings. So there you have it. These are the data we are working with. We are able to get the result for the prices, as you can see here, and then the result for the names. So you can see that here. So this is all. This means we are all set to append this data into our chart, which is the final thing we're gonna do. So to do that, we already import the chart up here from the Chart.js library. So still, this is gonna be done inside of the ng on init. So I'm just gonna scroll down a little bit, maybe add a comment that says show charts data. So to show the chart data, I'm gonna make reference to that chart by running this dot chart. Remember, we created a variable up here called chart. So it's taking in an array and a type of any using the TypeScript. So this just then we make reference to the chart we imported above by saying new chart. Now it's gonna take in something like a sort of a reference, sort of works like this in the app component. This we're gonna make reference to this particular variable. I think I'll call it a variable. you can check the Chart.js documentation for more insight on this, but I'm not gonna go too deep into that. But this is how it works, and as you see later in the video when I work in the app.html. So what type of chart are we going to be working on? I'm going to be working on a line, because we can work with different chart. We can work with a bar chart, pie chart, and the likes, but for this tutorial I'll be working with a line chart. So that's why we have this line. And then the next object we're going to be having here is the data object. This is what um we need to pass in the data we gotten from the Coinranking API. Now, this might look like complete um gibberish to you, like I'm typing this off the from top of my head, but to make things clear, I'm gonna head to the Chart.js documentation for you to see that I'm following the documentation as well. So what I'm gonna do is to head over to chart types and then head over to line. In fact, let's head to the landing page of the documentation. So as you can see here, we have a data that contains some objects like data sets, background color, background. So what I'm gonna do is to copy this particular data objects. So I'll clear this off and then paste it, and I'm gonna get rid of some things. So for instance, I don't need the options, so I'm gonna get rid of the options. I don't need the border color, get rid of this border color, get rid of this background color. In fact, I'm going to leave the border width. I'm going to leave the border width. And then what I need to change now is the data we're getting. So the first one is this label. So the label in our chart is gonna be coin name. So instead of having those variables in there, so I'm gonna pass in our data. That will be this dot coin name, and then in the data set, what I'm gonna change here is the first one is we're not working with this data, so we're working with this dot coin price. So this will be this dot coin price, which we have in the console. We have access to that in the console, and then the label, we can just call the label something like coin price. So this, there are so many settings to this, like you can check the documentation. So the border width, I can just increase it to 3. Let's increase it to 3. Then what else? I can just say fill. Let me have that as false. Then the background color. Let me change the background color. Background color. So I can just pass that as RGB. Same with the example I showed at the beginning of the video. I can just say 93,176. I mean, you can use any form of color you want, it's up to you, but I'm just trying to make it consistent with what I showed in the example in the beginning of the video. So I think that's all. Okay, we can add one more thing, the border color. Let's also add the border color. So border color, can just have an hashtag 3E95CD. So I think that's all. I can save this and then head back to the project and see if we have our chart displayed on the page. Oh, we have this error, can't acquire context. That's because I made a huge error. I didn't import this in our app components. A big error from me, sorry about that. So like I said earlier, we're gonna get this canvas variable. So I'm gonna head over to the app components, and then I'm gonna create a div, and inside of this div we're gonna have a tag called canvas. So it's inside of this canvas we pass in the id called canvas, and then we make reference to the charts variable we created inside of the ts file. So we can just set the width and the height of this. So width can be something like let's say 400, then the height can also be 400. I think that's a good size. So let me save, and maybe this time it will show on the page. I don't know. So we have our Redot running. Okay, now we have an error. I want us to pay attention to this error. It says line is not registered controller. So there's something in the documentation of Chart.js called, you might have this error anytime you want to implement Chart.js in your Angular application. So what I want you to do is to search for something called registrables. So let me see if it's gonna work here. Registrables. It's in the documentation somewhere in Chart.js. So let me show you. When I was working with this project, I had a slight issue with this. So this was what made it work for me. So if you have any form of errors like this, it may be what you need. So this is it here. So instead of importing charts alone, you might need to import registrables as well. So what I'm gonna do is to put this here, registrables, and then in the constructor, what we have to do is to make reference to the charts module, and then say something like register, and then spread the registrables imports in it. Yeah, something like this. Yes, if you check the documentation, that's what they were asked to do. So I think that registers everything in the chart. So when I save and I head back, I expect the error to disappear. Yes, as you can see, the error disappears. We have our charts showing live on the browser, no errors, and then you can see we have our coin ranking name, our coin name, as well as our coin price. So this is Bitcoin, just like we have in the sample I showed in the beginning of this tutorial. So this Bitcoin and the price. We can just over any of the coins. I think there are 50 in total, and then you get the name and the price. So this is just a simple and straightforward application. If you have any form of questions, please drop them in the comment section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe to support me in creating more videos. I really appreciate you guys if you do that. So before I go, let me quickly run a summary of what we did once again. The first thing we did was to generate a auth service file, and inside this file we import the necessary modules needed to run this application. We imported the client and the headers in the service. We got the API key from Coinranking and then set up a bunch of headers, created the crypto function, injected the HTTP client, set up the bridge URL for the, and as well as the proxy URL. Then we return the data, as you can see here. Also in the app module, let's not forget, that's where we imported our HTTP client module as well as our auth service in the import and the providers module successfully. And then we head over to the component.ts file. This is where we set up our service. We import the service, import Chart.js as well as registrables, created these 4 variables here. We also did some bit of dependency injections and then register the charts. So inside the ng init lifecycle hook, this is where we consume the service, which is crypto data, which can be gotten from the auth service. Then it returns the data. We pass it to the, we got the price and then the name, assign the data to the price and the name variables we created above here. Then last thing we did was to make reference to the Chart.js library by passing in the type of chart we want to do, and then passing in the data, and then as well as some default options in the dataset array. So that's all we did here. I think it's pretty much clear. So thank you very much for watching this particular video, and I would see you in the next one. Take care.